it's happening, and today we would like to summarize what was going on in the agrarian sphere, what the ministry was doing. It's something that we'll start with later on during the official conversation, and off records we may talk about what's in my opinion and in opinion of the ministry and the market will be going on in the year coming, at least the variants of the development, some things that we feel sure about, and some threats that may emerge this year for the agrarians. And we will exchange thoughts in this regard. I think we will start with the presentation that the ministry drew up that characterizes in brief what the ministry was doing during the year. It's clear during these months of war, and the main work was related to the challenges brought by the war. After that, I will give a couple of comments regarding the things that were happening this year, and we'll proceed to the plans for the next year. And Julia. Well, it's clear that during presentation it always looks beautiful and complex, so that's why let me start giving you some comments about what was shown in the presentation. First of all, the regulation. Really, during the year, there were a lot of the regulation acts adopted comparing to the other periods. And I personally, like everybody says, but it doesn't always happen this way, I'm adherent to the point of view of simplification, of facilitation. No matter how specific it sounds, war helped everything. The argument that during the war we have to import everything without excessive permits, and we were doing things that we were unable to do previously. We were stumbling upon some myth and other stories why that was impossible. And in the sphere of the regulation, we did a lot, and we can talk about it separately, but generally this presentation, this page of the presentation looks like what kind of the regulation is that? It's related to export and import, to transportation of the goods inside the country. It found its reflection in the fact that this year we could surreptitiously undertake two reforms that we were waiting for 20 years related to herbicides and the seeds, with a very powerful facilitation with the seeding material. The next thing is support of the agrarian sector. The money for agrarians were not allocated this year, and all the money forwarded this year for agrarians were the terminal story within 579 loan program. The country, the state extended the loan, and you had to only pay 20%, while the state covered 70%, and the pledge could be could amount this 20%, and it could be wheat, and the agrarians borrowed more than 40 billion hryvnias, and none of these loans is non-performing for the time being. And this may serve as an example, this part of 579 program. European Union extended 50 million euro. We added for the support of the smallest farmers. I mean, those who have less than 120 hectares of land and less than 20 cows. In the summer, we launched a program related to horticulture and greenhouses. The main work is done through the banks. As you see, 378 million applications were approved. We agreed it with the World Bank, and they allocated funds budgeted for the next year, and the level of trust to this program will be high enough, and it's good in my opinion. Under this program we can create new jobs, and horticulture should have been developed way before the war, and the main factor holding it back was the absence of the land market. People keep investing, and we were falling behind all of our neighbors and all the agrarian countries in the world. Today it's a good idea for those who live in the country. For the veterans, the compensation is high enough, 17% per hectare, and this is something that the farmers can do, and we talk a lot about it. We talk frequently about it. The sleeves. In the summer, we had quite a powerful concern about the fact that if the grain corridor is not opened in the sea, we will have no place to store, no place for storage of the seeds. So with the help of Canada, with these sleeves and Japan through FAO, we procured all the available sleeves throughout the world for 7 or 8 million tons, and the equipment for loading and transportation of these seeds, of this grain. I think you haven't heard within the last couple of months that there is no place for storage, and it's with account of all the breakdowns in operation of the ports and with account of the losses. Also, there was a number of program for the grain and buckwheat extended by Bayer. We covered that issue. It's quite frequently discussed in Ukraine, and we have to give Canada its due that they react at all the requests of Ministry of Agrarian Policy. There were many programs related to cattle farming sponsored by them. For the next year, we will support the greenhouses, the program of compensation under 579. Also, there are one-time payments for the smallest agrarians, and $50 million, not a small amount in my opinion, that all the elevators, everybody can procure new elevators or switch to LPG within this amount of 50 million hryvnias, or they can switch to LPG or solid fuel boilers. Also, there is money allocated by the World Bank for procurement of wheat and corn for the countries of Africa, but they will hardly go there because grain from Ukraine was advertised a lot by the president of the country, and many countries allocated funds for that, so the donor funds will be channeled that way, probably to horticulture. And also there is another one big program that we were working together with IFC on, more than $1 billion. They can do relanding, and we asked them to decrease the amount of the loan, because the first check they extend is usually, and to forward those funds to the medium-sized agrarians. It will take time, but I hope we will launch it this year. However, we have to expand 579 for agrarians this year because they end up in a situation when they have to work, but unfortunately the majority of them doesn't make any money this year. Last year we launched the Agrarian Register. It made the work of the sector more transparent. It was developed together with the World Bank, and which is the indicator of trust to this program, and USAID will launch a number of programs through this platform next year. Agro-logistics. What we can emphasize in the area of logistics are a number of important results. First of all, under the calendar, what happened is the cancellation of fees and restrictions for import of the products to Europe. It's very important. Unfortunately, for the time being, it's temporary, but the Europeans are ready for this, and it's good that they're ready to discuss how it will be happening in future. Ukraine wants, we want Europeans to tell us one time. For example, we don't cancel everything within 1 year, but we will keep canceling it within certain period, but so that they tell us how it will be happening and within which time frame, so the processing industry will understand the coordinates, because it's the best logistically rich market available for Ukraine. And how it was happening before this, how it did not stimulate the processing, because the Europeans were coming every year and they were providing quotes and fees for these or those types of products, and what will be happening next year we will tell you next year, and that's why none of the businesses can comply with the projects depending on some politician, including the European ones. Another important thing is what the country top management were doing. Ministry of Transportation and other agencies, we were engaged in a number of negotiations. It's obviously the grain deal with Turkey and United Nations, which allowed us exporting sufficient amount of grain. It has a number of nuances due to a slow control on the part of the country we'll know during the passage through Bosphorus Strait, but we keep working. Another important thing is definitely that a lot of work was done in agrarian sector with the neighboring countries, with Poland, Hungary, Slovakia and Romania, in terms of export of Ukrainian grain under facilitated procedures and to be forwarded to through their ports. The Europeans in principle reacted at many requests of the Ukrainian government, and that they allocated €1 billion for development of so-called solidarity ways. It's a generalized notion for everything that goes through Europe. Euro integration, there was a lot of routine work in the ministry, because if we take the association agreement that sets more than 2,000 tasks for us, 690 something are related to Ministry of Agrarian Policy, because it's about the agriculture and food. So there is a lot of tasks and Europe pays a lot of attention to it this year. No, regardless the war, the ministry was doing its job and dynamics is noticeable, and by the amount of the tasks fulfilled we can take pride in them. After extension of the candidate status for us, what I've seen, and the Europeans held a number of trainings for representatives of different ministries, the number of tasks increased multifold, and the terms that they set are incredibly short compared to those that other countries had. That's why, starting with the spring, we start creating different negotiated procedures. It's complicated because Europeans have quite a complicated opinion of the agriculture that we will have to discuss a lot. And there is a lot of bureaucratic and non-creative work that we will be facing pretty soon. Irrigation and development of fish industry, a lot of attention was paid to this sector. Talking about the war, what's going on with the fish industry in Ukraine today? It's allowed to fish in the seas, in the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov, in the basins of Dnipro, but you had to have a permit and a quote. Before today, everything was done without the bid. There was a committee, the evaluation committee, which evaluated you by a number of factors, and they provided you with a quote. Besides, if you would have liked, for example, if you would have wanted to cultivate the oysters in the Black Sea somewhere around Odessa, it was also done without the bid. So most of the things that were done in the fish industry is that those procedures became more transparent, starting this year. If anybody wants to buy a boat for fishing, they can do it at the lowest price, at the best price. So this is the main thing that changed, but there was a lot of work because in every sector of fishing we had to implement the bidding procedure to identify the bids, to disallow monopolization, and in my opinion that's the main thing that will forward the development, that will pull the development of this industry, because there is the joke in Odessa that they fish 1 ton of fish per day, but only in one street 10 tons are eaten. As to the irrigation, this story we have to let it go and we have to develop it. Two things that should be done in this field, in my opinion: one is already done, but one is in progress, and it will be adopted, I think, next year. What's closest to the farmer, those are pump stations, and those areas where water is allocated, it should be given away to the farmers. The law is already adopted, and at the level of the ministry we fulfilled all the technical things so that farmers could procure it and create the union of the water users. And we already agreed it with the World Bank that they will allocate funds for that. So the farmers are a locomotive, just like previous 20 years, and thanks God, I hope they will be the locomotive for irrigation. And another reform that should be undertaken is the mainway channels. But there will be a lot of fighting in this area, a lot of other work. We have a lot of work done with regard to grain from Ukraine, the grain which is forwarded to Africa. The representatives of the ministry are going there next week, and they will do their job there. So without going very profoundly into detail, this is what I would like to summarize for the year. So should we better allow the journalists ask questions about this year or proceed to the next year? Yeah, let's start with the questions. I would like everybody to withhold from the publication of the news due to security reasons, and if anybody has questions, please let me know. Good morning, Mr. Minister. Alexander Kotyak, Ukrainian radio. Everything is clear, seems clear, but the question is as follows. What did we lose during this 10 difficult months of the war? The agrarian sector has some losses in terms of land or farms because unfortunately agrarian sector cannot go without it, and unfortunately we lost something and we keep losing. So let's start with the clear figures. We lost about 20% of the lands. They are under occupation at the moment, and those are the lands that were given as winter crops, because is the winter wheat and barley and sunflower area. Those very lands will be most densely mined, because talking about, for example, Chernihiv and Sumy, what we faced immediately in the spring after liberation of those areas is that we were thinking that the size of problem is way bigger. And the first week after liberation of those territories, there was a lot of appeals by the agrarians. We were doing something all the time All the time we were discussing something with state emergency service, and then things changed dramatically. Why it happened? Because this is the power of farmer movement. Is it has high competition, and they have the composition of those people themselves is very powerful because they were formed during this period of competition. It's not that they inherited it, but they were fighting for their farms, for their lands, and there were a lot of challenges. So everything was happening quite swiftly because the agrarians agreed it with the state emergency service themselves. They passed with their people with across the fields with GPS. They identified the coordinates of the landmass, and the emergency service was coming, and they were spending way less time than they would have used otherwise. So that's why the work was fulfilled way faster. In fact, the density of mines was less, and I think in the south we will face a bigger scale of such problem. We were already facing it, and during yesterday's meeting we already we were discussing this problem. For example, why we prohibited any burning in the fields. And now we need some technological solutions to gain access to at least some visual access to the landscape, to identify the location of the mines. So there's a lot of technical issues to elaborate any rules. So other than the lens, yeah, I focused on it. Thank you for drawing my attention to it. So we lost a lot of dynamics generally. Every year we were developing very quickly. We had 108 million tons. This last year we had 60 and something tons. So we canceled a lot of projects in the area of development, and this loss of dynamics is for a number of years, I think. If, for example, tomorrow say we win within a month, and something happened in Moscow and they finished this war under the conditions that we deem necessary. So this dynamics is something that we've lost practically in every sphere. But I'm wondered by a lot of things. I'm surprised we started the export of a lot of corn to Europe. Regardless the war, we were preparing a lot, we were building the factories, and we became so competitive that even during the war period we pushed France and other competitors out of the market. And now that we asked Canada and France to provide the humanitarian aid, but so they were saying, like, first you import it to us and then we export it back to you. So what gives me hope is that what we've been just talking about is the fact is a very competitive environment. You know that practically every farmer represents something by themselves. They are not like random people, and no matter how difficult they feel this year, you've seen 96% of the fields that were under control of Ukraine, they were cultivated and they were harvested. Fantastic prices for gas, but we dried it all. Fantastic prices for transport, but somehow we exported it. So we were doing the section, the breakdown by loans, and the vast majority of the farmers paid their rent before the new year. I mean, they know that they lose, but farmer is not just about the money, it's the lifestyle. So no matter the conditions, they know that next year they will, whatever it costs, they will try to do something to sow something with but they have no other plan. Yes, the dynamics for the next year is such that we will most likely harvest even less than this year, and we may talk later about the reasons for that. Olia Pashko, you were saying about the Euro Integration Act, and after the Euro integration, did we already implement any laws, and how many are still left to be implemented, and how many million tons of grain were exported thanks to the grain corridors, or maybe separately within grain for Ukraine, and what's going on with the land market, or is it developing, or did it stop? Again, so the first thing is regarding Euro integration, second, grain from Ukraine, and general statistics of the grain export. Well, the Euro integration legislation, before the new year, we were orienting the plan agreed during the signature of the association agreement, and the laws that were contemplated by that plan were adopted this year. The part of the plan for this year, it proceeds to the tasks that are already new in compliance with the status of Ukraine as a candidate. So it's already another phase, is the next phase, but now that we were moving in this express method, so the main things that were adopted is the regulation of the herbicides, the regulation of the seeds, and the amendment to the law about the veterinary medicine. The new rules is the European rules that will be applied. This year we will have a lot of work at every. In principle, we're trying to coordinate it with other countries similar to us that have way more similar to ours than others, like Polish and Lithuanians. So they tip us off at some things that we wouldn't have paid attention to, or that they did not. And by the amount of lands transferred to the agricultural and about the application of genetically modified organisms and the Euro integration and herbicides. So there will be a discussion about this GMO, what will be the procedures and what will be the crops that will be allowed to be sown in Ukraine. But off records, we all understand that these nuances exist in Ukraine, specifically in terms of soy, for example. When we're talking about the grain from Ukraine, it's hundreds thousands tons, not millions. Talking about the grain corridor, the sea grain corridor, during the autumn month we were exporting at least 3 million tons, except for August, maybe million and something. I think that in general it would amount to 15 million tons until New Year. The land market is operating as we were expecting. We didn't stop it. Moreover, we renewed the operation of the register, and we think it should keep operating. It's not as vivid as somebody would have expected, or I wouldn't say as somebody would have wanted. The prices are obviously, if we talk in dollars, they're obviously lower because people were orienting at NGO and it was in hryvnia, so it doesn't catch up with the inflation. It's good that the market is operating. We are totally against any alteration of the law that would allow the legal entities to buy out the land, and I think the majority of the market is against it as well. So I think that the land market is developing in quite a natural way, even during the war. I will have last question in this part of our meeting about the forecast for the next year. You already mentioned that we have this euro integration piece of work. Maybe there is something else that you would like to cover, to comment. So yeah, it's a big piece of work, bureaucratic euro integration work. About the forecast is the work related to irrigation with the implementation of a number of projects like infrastructure projects. We signed a memorandum with Poland of the oil pipe, the sunflower seed oil pipe. The Polish already identified their company because the pipe will be 90% in the area, going through the area of Poland, and they know their legislation better. It's important for us to give the status to this project that will facilitate all the procedures, because under normal conditions the construction part is taken way less than the coordination and negotiation themselves. The main part of the work to be focused on this year, for example, if last year it was the export of grain, now it's the increase of the liquidity in the market. So any programs that would improve it is something that we will be doing next year, because it's lacking in the summer, in the spring, during harvesting season. It will be lacking during autumn, during another sowing campaign. That's why, because such problems, they influence, they have impact for a number of years. We think that the next year, what will be the problems faced by the agrarians next year? First of all, is the lack of funds. This is the main problem. Another thing, I think that, or we hope that in case there is no global recession, the good grain price will be maintained. We hope that starting with the middle of the spring, the price of logistics will become lower. The other thing is whose grain will be kept. Well, the weather, nobody can influence the weather, and at the same time we think that there will be a fall of the harvest, the decrease of the harvest in Ukraine due to a number of reasons. And first of all, because of the main crop that was given most of the income was the corn, and it has a number of risks in terms of sowing, in terms of harvesting. First of all is the lack of funds. It requires a lot of nitrogen fertilizers, and they are pretty costly now, and in view of the position of the manufacturers in that area, I think they will remain expensive. And even in the autumn, we already observed that the amount of procurement of the nitrogen fertilizers already fell. And due to a number of reasons, including weather and power shutdowns and missile attacks, the big amount of corn is being harvested during spring, and the fields would not be ready for sowing by spring, and the farmers will switch to a number of other crops, for example soy and sunflower, and they give less harvest than the corn usually, and the harvest will be lower due to this number of reasons. So we are wrapping up our conversation. We were witnessing the press conference by Mykola Solskyi, the Minister of Agrarian Policy and Food, and I appreciate this conversation. Now that our video operators are wrapping up, I invite all the journalists to check out the new website of the ministry. I know that there's a lot of useful practical information. So the team of the ministry hope that it will be a good, it will be